Welcome to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership, where you'll hear insights and useful strategies, as well as lessons learned from other nonprofit leaders and valuable tips from a variety of experts. Here to help you with the challenges and opportunities you face day after day is your host and nonprofit leadership expert, Sarah Olivieri.
Hello, nonprofit leaders, and welcome to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. I'm your host, Sarah Olivieri, and today I have a special guest for you, Dr. Renee Rubin Ross. She is a leader in board and organizational development, and she's going to share some of her journey of where she's come to today. And we're going to be talking specifically about racial equity in and inclusive strategic planning. And before I introduce Renee, I just want to share a quick bonus tip for everybody today because we're actually re-recording this episode after we had some audio stuff that we didn't like. And I think so often as leaders, we're sometimes hesitant to just redo or fix mistakes. But I just want to encourage everybody. We all, have things that we don't love, and certainly don't be a perfectionist and delay progress. But it is perfectly okay to say to the world, I didn't like the way that came out, or I made a mistake and I'm going to redo it or change my mind about how to do it in the future. So that's my bonus tip for you today. And I think there's probably some applications there too, as well, to racial justice and doing things better. So welcome, Renee. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey before we dive into our topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the welcome. And I love that you said that. So Dr. Renee Rubin Ross, our firm, the Ross Collective, designs and leads inclusive participatory processes for nonprofits. I use she, her pronouns, identify as a white person and consultant. And based out of Northern California, although and I say we because sometimes it's just me, sometimes I am facilitating alongside BIPOC colleagues. We are leading conversations around the country these days. So getting on a plane from time to time. But a lot of our work is in Northern California.
I love it. So how did you come to work in the space of strategic planning and social justice?
Yeah. So long time background in education. And my story is that many years ago, I had a job and I thought it was the funny thing is I thought it was my dream job. I was working for a funder giving out money. And so everybody would come up to me and be like, oh my gosh, can't believe you're doing this. And so I guess from the outside, it seemed like a dream job. From the inside, it didn't feel like the right fit. And some things were happening in this organization where it seemed like people who were male were getting more privileges. I, at that time, had very small children. I had asked if I could work an 80% schedule, and that was a benefit that some people on the staff had, and was told that I couldn't. And so it was like, how am I going to balance everything? And in addition, I have written about this on my blog as well. We had these incredible organizations that we were funding, but there was also some dysfunctional stuff that was happening with our board. In the end, I, after several years, went to my boss and said, I either want to get promoted or I want to leave. And I got my answer within a few months and I was fired. And at the time, I could tell the story now, but at the time it was really, really traumatic. I actually thought, oh my gosh, I had my dream job and I lost it. And where does that leave me?
Yeah.
And so it really was this kind of reckoning of I have one life. What do I want to do with it? Who do I want to be in conversation with? How do I want to lead? And it led to some real soul searching. And eventually, the first thing I did was actually, over the first few months, have something like 100 conversations with colleagues and people that I'd met along the way, and start to ask them, how do I add value? What is special about what I do? How have we connected? What opportunities are out there? And really learned a lot from those conversations and started doing consulting. Somebody saying to me, wow, I've found a lot of value from your work. And eventually did more training and facilitation, and got into the racial equity work, which I'm sure we'll talk about
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. So you had a little dose of your own inequity, and then big tip for everybody: you started out the right way with research. So often I hear
Mm.
people starting nonprofits or starting businesses. I think I read one on Facebook just the other day. I really have been feeling like I need to start this program. And that's great to feel compelled, but then you got to research to make sure that what you offer is bringing value, just like you said. So, how did you come to racial equity specifically?
Yeah. So um, this came out of some of the conversations through an organization called the Alliance for Nonprofit Management and some facilitated conversations where we did this one exercise. It was a fishbowl, and you had the white people on the outside of the circle, people of color in the inside. And then we kind of switched, but each time talking about their experiences. These were consultants, what was working, what was hard. And as I was listening to this and participating, I realized this is an area that I really care deeply about and that I see, and we all, I mean, I think so many of us see the inequities in our society. And what do I want to do about them? And how can I lead? That was the beginning. And so since then, doing a lot of training around facilitating racially just spaces, thinking about where can what is it that I can talk about? What do I need to bring somebody else alongside me so that we can lead together?
Yeah.
And what we try to do is open up space for people to have hard conversations. We know from research that when people of all backgrounds feel that they can talk about their identities and that both joy and barriers, everything is better. Work is better and organizations are better. Our world is better. So it's really, really important to do that. And it feels incredibly meaningful.
Yeah. So I love that you talk about racial equity specifically and talking about, what's safe to talk about. I think people struggle with, do I say diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think is nice, but it can be such a big basket, if you
Yeah.
will, that then it's
Yeah.
hard to get specific. So how did you come to, or how do you feel about the language how did you come to that language, racial equity, or when is the time to say we're working on racial equity versus diversity, equity, inclusion, or other
Mhm.
terms that people may use?
Mhm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I was just recently part of this last week, part of this board symposium event, and we had Carrie Ann Suarez from Equity in the Center sharing this wonderful resource of this Awake to Woke to Work, which is this framework of looking of how organizations can look at their own journey. Usually, it's pretty common for organizations to say, oh, yeah. Well, let's say historically white organizations, we need more people of color on our board. We need a more representative board. That's kind of the diversity piece. Then, but that doesn't really, there's usually some deeper issues that need attention. So I often talk about equity because I think of it as where we want to go, right? Which is we want to go to a society where everybody thrives and what needs to change in order for that to happen.
I love it. So let's dive into strategic planning and racial
Yeah.
equity. What is
Uh-huh.
the same or different when you approach strategic planning with a racial equity lens?
Oh, um, yeah. So a lot of things are the same. Yes. And I these days I'm talking about some different practices around strategic planning. And so the first one is name what's in the room. Right. And this is, what is happening, what's on the minds of the people who are in the room. I have a story that I often share, and it's about in COVID times, coming back from COVID. And there was a meeting. I was not running the meeting, but I was participating we were supposed to do some planning around what's going to happen uh, as this organization reopens. And what happened was that the agenda started. It was like, okay, we're going to talk about this other thing. We're going to talk about this other thing, and the emotions just get higher and higher and higher, and so much frustration. An hour goes by. I mean, I was shocked. It's like, how can you spend an hour not talking about the thing in the room? People are getting more and more angry and frustrated. Finally started planning for return after COVID, but um, you know, this is a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
How do you figure out what's in the room? Maybe it's
And
somebody. Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead,
want to
Sarah.
say that is a not so uncommon tale. I have been in that room working with organizations where now I just make it a practice to figure out what's in the room. And I tell my clients, if there are strong emotions in the room, you don't proceed with anything else until you have
Mhm.
reached a place, an emotional place in the room where people can proceed. But I've had almost the exact same experience as a consultant from the perspective of I walked in to do a workshop. I'd done it with every other department in the organization already. I'm like, no big deal. We're going to breeze right through this. It's been great so far. And as I started, I realized this room was angry. They didn't want to be there. They didn't understand why they were there. They felt very differently about their department's role compared to everybody else. And just like you, I had to be at this moment of like, well, this hour and a half isn't gonna follow the agenda. And, talk about being willing to like say things, didn't happen as planned. I just went to the executive director and said, there's definitely some issues to work on here. And we weren't able to get the planned workshop done. Instead, we addressed this other issue. But big
Yeah,
deal.
and that was your big thing. That was, I mean, that whatever it is has a lot of energy. Is the thing that is, until you get through that, I don't know, that
That's right.
swampy thing, and then get on the other side of it, then yeah, whatever plan you had in mind isn't really gonna be that
So
meaningful.
that's so important. And I want to just go a little deeper on what's in the room. I think, when we're talking about racial equity, people might be scared to ask that question. What are some of the real things that have come up from this? I kind of think sometimes like the biggest fear is not really knowing. So how bad can it get? How and how good can it get?
No, I mean, so one of the things that happened, I was co-leading a retreat with my colleague Benisa, who's a Black woman, and we did a lot of, building. We use meeting agreements. We did a lot of building the safe space in that room. At one point in the day, there was one Black woman who was on the staff, and she raised her hand and she said, I just want to say that I, a lot of the time, don't feel very safe as a member of the team. And it was like this moment, and oh my gosh, I felt terrible for her, but I also felt like, okay, as a white person, anything that I could say would just be, what am I actually gonna say that's really gonna be meaningful? And I was so appreciative that I could just not say anything, look over at my colleague Benisa, and let Benisa, who, has that shared experience of racism in our society, hold it and address what had come up. And it was like this moment of honesty that actually let other people around the table said, wow, we didn't know you felt that way. And thank you for sharing. And how do we change this? And some different things shifted in the organization. But, um, there has to be some conditions for building safety and, some response. And I think people have multiple truths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. So what happens after you address what's in the room? What's next?
Um, yeah. So some of the other practices. So what's in the room, and then I also talk about naming who is in the room, and some of that. So yeah, again, going back to it's people have different perspectives. Sometimes for white people, there's a sense of we don't want to talk about race. It's impolite. We're going to put people on the spot. if you are somebody who experiences racism, it may be that your family has been talking about race and racism. You have a lot of competency to talk about that because you need, as a parent, you need to prepare your children. So there's people are coming in with different levels of even, what's important to discuss. But for organizations, it uh, once leaders have that sensitivity, it really is okay to talk demographics and talk specifics, because once you do that, then you can start to say, okay, who needs to be part of this conversation and who is missing and what do we want to do about it?
Yeah, I love that. If we stay general all the time, we won't get down to the real specific problems
Yeah.
and
And
challenges. It's very hard to
yeah,
solve
and
for.
my colleague, Crystal Cherry and I, who is a black Crystal is a black woman based in Atlanta, and her website is the Board Pro, and we have worked with a couple boards and really done some conversations where we did a series of workshops. One was one was just like more general about bias, but then we also did some affinity groups or some sharing race stories. So where we had people, again, building safety, but then opening up, who is here, who is not here, who are we serving, who needs to be in part of these conversations.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, what's another one you have for us?
Yeah, yeah. So after naming what's in the room and naming who is in the room, the next one is around building trust. And wow, building trust is not so easy, but it's like I think it does actually go back to that story that you shared before of this group that was really, really angry. And if you had tried to say, we're just gonna accomplish this, it's like, no, we don't trust each other and we don't
Right.
trust you and we don't trust this organization. So how do you slow down? And some of that is um in terms of the processes that we lead is getting people to listen to one another and oh yeah, what I see is that the staff is working really hard. Oh yeah, I see that too, and I see some times where we need to increase our capacity. Oh yeah, oh now we have this shared understanding of what's happening in this organization and we have all these dreams of what we want to do, but it's hard to move towards those given the capacity challenges we're having. But it's really about listening to one another, and Adrienne Marie Brown, she talks about, working at the speed of trust,
Yes.
basically. Um, I also wanna say that I have worked with some organizations where, sadly, uh, trust had been broken in different ways. And I would say that sometimes, I mean, a lot of the times this stuff is easy, but sometimes it really is hard. And you may have to say, all right, we have a leader either on the board or staff side that is not building trust. And that person is really hurting our organization. And so it's okay to, and I'm sure that you've talked about this in your podcast as well. It's okay to make those tough calls and decisions, giving people due process, but also saying, we know what environment we want to create. We want to create a positive, affirming environment, and we're just seeing that's not the road we're going down right now.
Yeah, I've certainly I see these issues come up without directly working on strategic planning or racial equity when I do
Mhm.
what I call heart of the brand work. So, like the core identity of the organization, when we do
Mhm.
that work with teams, I will see past trauma come up, organizational trauma. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's about race related trauma, sometimes it has to do with other things. And that's always an important time to check. Is this a trauma that is the act is over and now we're in recovery mode? Or is it still
Mhm.
going on? Are there still
Mhm.
people? And like, I think what you were getting at is sometimes you let people go. I'm often advising nonprofit leaders, our job with our teams is to, we talk about building culture. I think maybe almost a little too much in a way, but I'll explain why I say that, because our hired teams are not like, they're not our family members. We do get to choose them. And if they're not a good fit, it is not our job to be a behavior, an applied behavior, an ABA person, or change their behavior or change their mind. If they're not inclined to come around to the way we've agreed to do things, we should let them go. And they will be happier wherever they go. But from that point, we're not just making everybody be our culture. We kind of get to choose our culture and then at our organizations, and then we get to place people who want to participate and grow that culture and let people go who don't. We don't need to change them. Who built it.
Right. And I mean, it is on either the board or staff side, when people are disengaged, when people are negative, always negative, when people, it really drags down the rest of the group. It's very demoralizing.
That's right.
So, I mean, I teach board development. And sometimes people are like, well, what do you do about that person who is taking up all of our time? It's like, yeah, just you can set some limits and say, we're going in this direction. Do you want to come with us? And if not, it seems like that's okay.
That's right.
Change happens. And
I like to think of it as compassionately rolling out the red carpet so that they can walk away with dignity and integrity. If that's your MO, which hopefully it is for most people.
So I mean, we talked about building trust, and and I would say 80 to 90% of the time it's smooth. But I don't want to disregard, because some people may be listening in and be saying, oh my gosh, there is no trust, sadly, in our organization. And so in those, whatever it is, 10% of the cases, you do have to really, make some tough decisions. And I agree with you. I love what you're saying about compassion, right? All right. No one is a bad person. But we do want to look towards building a positive, energizing culture where everybody can thrive. That's really, really important.
Yeah. And I think if you have that compassion, I love the book, Radical Candor, which in a way doesn't have the greatest name because so much of it is about compassion. And I like to say, which they talk about, they don't use these words in Radical Candor, but that being clear is usually compassionate. Being direct enough to be clear is usually the most compassionate way to be. To actually just, politely name the elephant in the room. Ignoring it isn't really compassionate. Pretending it isn't there isn't compassionate.
And I've been thinking recently, this whole element of building belonging, it's not just a nice to have. I was at a retreat. I was running a retreat recently with our clients, Student Achievement Partners, and they do a lot of support for school districts and research around education. What they found is that feeling of belonging is needed. For students to feel a sense of belonging in the classroom accelerates their learning so much. And I think it's the case for all of us. We feel a sense of belonging. We do our best work. This is how organizations work well. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
You've got to have it, folks. You've got to have it. So what's in the room? Who's in the room? Building trust.
And then so next step is creating a vision. Where are we trying to go? And that is, once you have that, there is a sense of we, and you figured out what you need to, put to the side, and what you need to talk about. Then where are we trying to go, and listening to one another to build that shared vision. And the last step is really building your strategic plan. So building the goals and the strategies and all of that.
Yeah. What can you give us some, what kind of racial equity pursuits have you seen some of the organizations you worked with go after, or creative solutions that people have come up with? Love to give some
I think that,
examples, just to get people's
yeah, I mean, I think so last year we worked with an organization called Bike East Bay, based in the East Bay. And what they're working on is something called mobility justice. And that is the idea that every person can bike or roll or walk in their community and feel safe. And so if you start, and man, don't we all want that? I mean, and so if you start thinking about that, then, and again, I think that's what's exciting about it is it's this very simple yet inspiring vision, right? Because then you start thinking about, well, what are all the barriers to that? Maybe for some people, it's they don't have a good bike. For other ones, they don't have a good road. So and so what does, and then for other people, they don't know how to bike. So they start offering the cycling classes in all different languages and work on signage. I mean, there's so many different components. But again, it's that everybody deserves, going back to this idea of like everybody from all backgrounds deserves to be able to thrive in their communities. And it's not, and different people have a longer journey to get there too.
Yeah, it's such a great example. Any others for us before we wrap up?
We are right now finishing up our strategic planning with an organization called Youth Alive that works on violence prevention in Oakland. Very much, almost everyone, many of their staff are Black, Indigenous, people of color, really close to the community. And I think one of their challenges is actually just the intensity of the work and balancing that responsiveness and care. And this is what I love about them is that they are working on healing. And as we've been saying, that it's not one and done, man. Healing is just this ongoing, all right, another thing happens and then we need to get back to that, and another thing happens, and even this desire to support community members is incredibly hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
So planning has been for them to say, all right, I'm coming in with a lot of judgment, what feels doable for you given the resources you have.
I love that you said that. I did a mini training not so long
Mhm.
ago about the importance of honoring your true capacity. It sounds like for any organization that's healing, that's working in very challenging, that takes so much capacity on its own. For me, I'm, a part single mom of a kid with some special needs, who happens to also be mixed race, which comes with its own extra. And the reality for me that I've found is working 90 hours a month, which by most standards is very little, is too much
Mhm.
for me.
Mhm.
I need to be around 60 hours a month,
Mhm.
65, up to 70 is okay.
Yeah.
And just my own journey of honoring that, I had been working less, but in secret, feeling as
Yeah.
though people would judge me badly for
Mhm.
only working 60 or so
Mhm.
hours a month. It was mostly in my head.
Yeah.
But I have to, I had to really honor that and make all of my plans. And once my
Mhm.
plans honored my real capacity, understanding the time constraints and the emotional constraints of everything else in my life, I got a lot more
Mhm.
done, actually.
Yeah, and I mean it's really complicated. I think that anyone who's a helper, right? There's a sense of, man, the world needs my help and I got to step up more and more and more and more.
That's right.
And then sometimes we're not helping ourselves or taking care of ourselves because it's like so much need for the world out there.
Yeah.
And so trying to find that balance. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes a huge difference, and we can easily take on too much as helpers, and
Mhm,
then
mhm.
we actually don't help as well, when we take on too much, or at least I think we do. Um,
Yeah.
so any final words of wisdom for our audience? And then would you also share, who, and what
Yeah.
should be reaching out to you and how to do that?
Yeah. Um, so I mean, I think that's funny. We are recording this again. And there is this is just really rich material. I know that and people come to my board development strategic planning class, they are wanting to know how to how to build engagement, how to get people connected, how to get board members connected. And it really is all of this. Well, what's in the room with the people that you are in? Someone said to me a while back, I was saying, okay, if you want to build engagement, build those relationships. And someone was like, well, that's really expensive, isn't it? I was like, no, we're not talking about a 5-course meal. We're just talking about a Zoom conversation
Yeah.
to say, hey, I'm interested in how you're doing and want to know what's in the room for you. And that's kind of the pulse that leaders should be taking all the time. So I guess I'm coming back to where I started, but it feels like we need to all remember to just keep connecting and keep reaching out in that way.
And how should people reach
Oh,
out to you?
yeah. So our firm is the Ross Collective, the rosscollective.com. We have a newsletter that comes out twice free, e-lists on nonprofit strategy, racial equity, and leadership. And I have a book coming out on inclusive strategic planning. It's going to come out in early 2025. So you can join my list and get updates on that too.
Excellent. We'll have all the links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Renee. I appreciate your time and your energy in this space. And thank you out there for listening and all that you do. This podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders. I want to help you unleash your full potential to advance the missions I know you care about so deeply. I've been in your shoes too, and now it's such an honor to be a coach and consultant to nonprofit leaders. And I know how much resources and hearing from experts like Renee today can help you do your jobs better, which is why, in addition to the podcast, I have created the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you can get bite sized, actionable weekly tips in your email inbox. And you can get that at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Do take a moment, if you can, to rate and leave a review for this show, because it helps other nonprofit leaders like you find the podcast so that they can benefit as well. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take time for self-care. Maybe ask yourself, who's in the room? What's in the room in your next conversation? And be sure to subscribe and listen to the next episode of Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Until then, all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.